On New Year's Eve, as fireworks lit up the frozen winter sky, my daughter stood in my cold living room and asked Dad, "Do you like the Ford Mustang 1965 that my husband gave you?" I felt my hands go numb. A Mustang for 7 months. I'd been surviving on food stamps and charity meals, wearing two coats indoors because my heater was broken. I looked at her, then at her husband, wealthy, charming, standing by the door in his tailored coat, and I whispered, "Sweetheart, I never got any car." Her smile faltered, and I knew right then that something was terribly wrong. That question, "Do you like the car?" was the beginning of 7 months of lies unraveling. But before we go there, tell me, have you ever had a moment when something someone said made your blood run cold? Comment yes if you have, and drop your country and time zone. I want to know I'm not alone in this. The champagne bottle caught the light from my kitchen window. Expensive foreign, the kind of thing I'd never bought in 68 years. Nancy set it on the counter with a soft thud, snow melting from her wool coat onto the linoleum behind her. Julian stamped his Italian leather shoes on my doormat, his breath clouding in the cold air that followed them. Inside data, Nancy said, her smile bright, but somehow not reaching her eyes. Happy New Year. I'd been sitting alone for 3 hours, watching fireworks bloom over downtown Minneapolis through frost-edged glass. The soup I'd heated donated from the church pantry had gone cold in its bowl. My house, a small rambler on the edge of Powderhorn Park, felt cavernous without Marie. 12 years since cancer took her, and the empty chair across from me still made my chest tight. "Come in," I said, standing slowly. My knees protested. The thermostat was set to 62, to save on heating bills I could barely afford. "I wasn't expecting you." "And we were at the Chambers Hotel," Julian said, unwinding his cashmere scarf. "Charity gala we thought we'd stop by on our way home." The Chambers Hotel, 5-star. The kind of place where a single doctor, ink, cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I glanced at Nancy, my daughter, who'd built a successful career in finance. Married well, moved to a house in Edina I'd only seen in photos. She looked elegant in her black dress, diamonds at her throat. A stranger wearing my daughter's face. "But that's kind," I said. Though the words felt hollow, they hadn't visited in 4 months. Nancy moved through my small kitchen with practiced efficiency, finding clean mugs in the cupboard. Despite the years since she'd lived here, Julian stood by the radiator rubbing his hands together, his gaze drifting over my worn furniture, the patched sofa, the stack of bills on the side table. I'd forgotten to hide. "Dad, are you eating enough?" Nancy asked, her voice carrying that edge of concern that felt more like obligation than care. "I'm fine," I lied. The food stamps stretched thin, but pride kept the truth locked away. She poured 3 mugs of coffee. I didn't have champagne glasses, and we sat at the small table where I'd taught Nancy multiplication tables. 3 years ago, Julian cleared his throat, that polished smile settling onto his face like a mask. "Gary," he said, using my first name in that familiar way he'd adopted 2 years into the marriage. Nancy and I were talking in the car. We wanted to check in about the Mustang. I blinked. "The what?" "The Ford Mustang," Nancy said, leaning forward. "The 1965 model. Julian had it delivered to you last spring." "Dad, do you like it? We've been meaning to ask. But with everything." My mind went blank. I set my coffee down carefully, my math teacher brain running through calculations. Last spring, 7 months ago, a Ford Mustang 1965, the dream car I'd circled in magazines as a young man, the car Marie and I had promised ourselves we'd buy someday when money wasn't so tight. Someday had never come, Anansi. I said slowly, "I haven't received any car." Julian's smile didn't falter. "Gary, I had it delivered in May." The dealer confirmed delivery. I've been covering the insurance and registration fees ever since. $6,000 a month to make sure you had reliable transportation, and upkeep covered $6,000 a month for 7 months. My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice steady. Years of teaching rowdy teenagers had taught me to never show alarm. "There's no car in my garage." I said, "There's no car anywhere," said Dad. "Are you sure?" Nancy's concern deepened, and I saw something else flicker across her face. Worry not about me, about my memory. My mind, Julian had planted that seed. Well, Nancy, I'm 68, not 98, I said quietly. My memory is fine. I wake up every morning, solve the crossword in 15 minutes, balance my checkbook to the penny. If someone had delivered a 1965 Ford Mustang to my house, I would remember. Julian shifted his expression, still pleasant, but something harder beneath it. The paperwork shows it was delivered. I have the receipts. Perhaps someone at the dealership made an error, or it was never delivered at all. I said the words coming out sharper than I intended. Silence settled over the table. Outside, distant fireworks popped and crackled, celebrating a year I wasn't sure I wanted to see. Nancy looked between us, confusion and something else. Fear maybe crossing her face. I'm sure there's an explanation, she said quickly. Julian, maybe you should call the dealer tomorrow. Get it sorted out, of course, Julian said smoothly. He stood buttoning his coat. We should let you get some rest, Gary. Long night I rose too, my legs stiff from the cold house. Nancy hugged me brief, perfunctory, and whispered, Take care of yourself, Dad. I wanted to tell her I was trying. I wanted to tell her the heater was broken, that I'd been living on soup and charity for months, that her weekly calls had dwindled to monthly check-ins. Instead, I said, You too, sweetheart. I poured them coffee I knew they wouldn't drink, and watched them leave, their luxury sedan disappearing into the snowy night, tail lights bleeding red through the darkness. The house felt colder when they left quieter. The house was silent again. I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Nancy's perfume still lingered faintly in the air. Expensive, floral, unfamiliar. Marie had never worn anything like that. My wife had smelled of lavender soap and chalk dust, the kind that clung to my sleeves after long days teaching simple, honest real. I set the mug down and looked around the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed weakly. Fighting the cold, the thermostat on the wall read 62 degrees, as high as I could afford to set it. Outside the window, snow drifted down in slow spirals, covering the empty driveway where no Ford Mustang had ever sat. 7 months. Julian had claimed he'd been paying for a car insurance, registration maintenance for 7 months, $6,000 a month, $42,000 total. And if there was one thing 5 years of teaching math had taught me, it was that numbers don't lie. I pulled my cardigan tighter and stood, my joints complaining. The house creaked softly, settling into winter like an old man easing into bed. I opened the hallway closet and stared at the 2 coats I'd been wearing, layered together since November. One navy blue, one olive green, both thin, both useless, against a Minnesota winter that didn't forgive poverty. The heater had broken in October. The repair estimate, $800, was still folded in the junk drawer. I couldn't pay it, so I wore 2 coats inside, slept under 3 blankets, and told myself it was temporary. Spring would come. I hadn't told Nancy. How could I? She was busy meetings, travel, charity events at luxury hotels. The last time she'd called 3 weeks ago, I told her I was fine. She sounded relieved. On the counter sat my weekly supplies. A loaf of bread from the food bank, canned chicken noodle soup from the church, powdered milk, apples growing soft at the edges. My food stamps covered the basics. The church helped when it could. Pride kept me from asking for more. This was my life now. 68 years old, retired after decades, teaching algebra and geometry to teenagers who rarely cared a small pension, smaller savings, social security that never stretched far enough, and a daughter living 20 minutes away in a house worth more than I'd earn in 10 lifetimes. I didn't resent her success. I was proud of her, but somewhere along the way, the distance between us had grown wider than miles. I walked to the small desk in the living room, the same one where I'd graded papers late into the night, helped Nancy with homework, and planned modest dreams with Marie. I opened the top drawer and took out my notebook. Teaching had trained me to document everything: attendance grades, lesson plans. That habit never left for 40 years. I'd tracked every dollar I spent, every bill paid, every transaction down to the penny. I opened to a fresh page and wrote the date, December 31st, New Year's Eve, the night my daughter asked about a car I'd never seen. Ford Mustang, 1965. Julian's claim delivered May. Monthly payment $6,000, on total claimed $42,000, and evidence none. My hand didn't shake. This was familiar territory, breaking a problem into parts, identifying what was known and what was missing. Every equation had a solution. If you were patient, I replayed the past 7 months with the precision I once used to check students' work, make garden repairs, fence work. No deliveries, June Nancy's birthday. A brief thank you call. July, fixed the leaking sink myself. August, nothing. September, heater broke. Coats indoors. October, hours in line to renew food assistance. November. Thanksgiving alone. Nancy texted from Cabo December, a generic Christmas card. Not once had a car arrived, no phone calls, no paperwork, no insurance notices, no registration forms, no mention from Julian until tonight. I wrote another line, why now? The answer settled heavily in my chest because Nancy had come over because she'd seen my house, and Julian needed an explanation for money that wasn't where it should be. I flipped to the back of the notebook and reviewed my bank statements. Everything balanced, no unusual deposits, no transfers, just my pension and social security, Julian's say. He'd been making payments. To whom for what? If the card didn't exist, the money had gone somewhere. I stood at the window and looked out at the quiet street. Snow-covered rooftops, sidewalks, bare trees. The world felt paused, holding its breath. Tomorrow, I would go to the bank. I would ask questions. I would start uncovering what Julian had done. I knew just as surely as I'd once proven theorems that he had done something. I thought about Nancy's face when I said there was no car. The hesitation, not doubt about Julian, doubt about me, about my memory, my mind that hurt, more than the cold, more than the empty pantry, more than 7 months of silence. I closed the notebook and stared at the empty driveway, through the frost on the glass. Tomorrow I would begin searching for answers. But tonight I sat alone in the cold, wondering how a man could lie so easily, and wondering what else he had lied about. The next morning, I stood in my doorway, staring at the empty space where a vintage Ford Mustang was supposed to be parked. Frost coated the driveway in thin crystalline sheets. The sun hung low and colorless above the neighborhood, offering light without warmth. I had slept poorly 3, maybe 4 hours, my thoughts looping endlessly around the same questions. Julian's lie had opened like a wound. I pulled on my heaviest coat, the olive green one, with the torn lining I kept meaning to repair, and wrapped a wool scarf twice around my neck. The walk to First Minneapolis Bank was only 12 blocks, but in January, 12 blocks could feel like a small expedition. The streets were quiet. New Year's Day, most people were still asleep, or nursing celebrations from the night before. I passed houses with Christmas lights, glowing faintly in windows, cars buried under snow, footprints from midnight revelers frozen solid in ice. My breath rose in white clouds, my knees ached. Still, I kept walking, my teacher's mind working through the problem, as it always had, step by step. Known Julian claimed he had paid $6,000 per month for 7 months. Known, no car had ever been delivered. Unknown where the money went. Question, did the money ever exist? First Minneapolis Bank sat on a corner lot along Lake Street, a sturdy brick building that had survived 80 Minnesota winters. I had banked there for 40 years. Ever since Marie and I opened our first joint account with $53 and cautious optimism that teaching salaries would somehow be enough. They had been enough barely. And after Marie died, barely became not quite. I pushed through the heavy glass doors, into warmth and fluorescent light. The lobby was nearly empty. A security guard by the entrance, one customer at the ATM, two tellers behind the counter. The younger teller, a woman with bright eyes and dark hair, pulled into a neat ponytail, smiled as I approached. "Good morning," she said. Her name tag read, "Ashley. How can I help you? Good morning," I replied, unwinding my scarf. "My name is Gary Brooks. I need to review some transactions on my account." "Of course, Mr. Brooks." She turned to her computer. "Do you have your account number? Or I can look you up by name and birth date." I gave her both and watched her work. Quick practiced, comfortable with systems I had never fully mastered. She was young, maybe Nancy's age, with a professional warmth that softened the impersonality of banking. "Okay, I've got your account," she said. "What transactions are you looking for?" I chose my words carefully. My son-in-law told me he's been making deposits into my account $6,000 per month for the last 7 months. I'd like to verify the amounts and dates. Ashley's expression stayed polite, but something shifted. She scrolled more slowly now, her brow tightening slightly. "Mr. Brooks," she said gently, "I'm not seeing any deposits like that. Your account shows only your monthly pension and Social Security deposits." My stomach tightened, but my voice stayed steady. "Nothing from May through December. No $6,000 deposits." "No, sir. Nothing at all." I gripped the counter. Could they be under a different account? One opened in my name without my knowledge. She nodded immediately. "Understanding? Let me do a broader search. What's his name?" "Julian Pierce. He's married to my daughter, Nancy." Ashley typed again, moving through screens, checking variations. Minutes passed. The ATM chimed behind me. The security guard shifted his stance near the door. I stood still, my heart beating evenly, the same rhythm that had carried me through decades of classrooms, Marie's illness, and every moment that demanded calm. "Mr. Brooks," Ashley said finally, her voice softer now. "I've checked all accounts associated with your name and Social Security number. There are no additional accounts and no deposits matching what you described." The warmth of the bank suddenly felt oppressive. "Are you certain?" I asked, though I already knew. "Yes, sir. I'm very sorry." She hesitated. "I can print your full transaction history for the past year if that would help." "Yes," I said, "please." She printed 3 pages and folded them neatly before handing them to me. They documented every dollar I had spent in 12 months. Groceries from the discount store, utilities kept low, prescriptions for blood pressure. Each line was a record of restraint. No deposits except my pension, 1 date 47, and per month Social Security, 1,520 thrice per month. Total monthly income, 3,300 and no $6,000 payments. No car insurance, no registration fees, nothing. Ashley met my eyes' concern. "Evident, Mr. Brooks. If someone claimed they were depositing money in your name, but wasn't, you may want to speak with our fraud department." Or she paused carefully. "Talk to your family." "Thank you, Ashley," I said. "You've been very kind." "Are you okay?" she asked. "Would you like me to call someone for you?" "I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't sure. "Thank you." I slipped the papers into my coat pocket and turned toward the door. The security guard nodded as I passed outside. The January cold hit me like a blow. I stood on the sidewalk, watching my breath vanish into the air. Cars moved along Lake Street, people going about their new year's routines, unaware that my understanding of the last 7 months had just shattered. Julian had lied not just about the car, but about the money, about payments that had never been made, about generosity that had never existed. But why and where had $42,000, real or imagined, gone? I began walking again, not toward home, but east toward downtown Minneapolis, toward the tall glass building where Nancy worked. North Star Financial Group, 23rd floor. A place I had never visited. The car was a lie. The money was gone, and I knew exactly who I needed to call next. When I got home, I sat down at the kitchen table and picked up the phone. With trembling hands, The bank statement lay spread before me. 3 pages of proof that no money had ever reached my account, but Julian had claimed payments 7 months, $6,000 each month, $42,000 total. The numbers were too specific to be fiction, too precise to be a mistake, which meant the money had gone somewhere, just not to me. I dialed the number I'd found online, for North Star Financial Group. Nancy's employer, a sleek glass tower downtown, where my daughter worked as a senior analyst, a job I'd never fully understood, but knew paid well enough for a house in Edina and cars that cost more than my yearly pension. The phone rang twice before a receptionist answered, her voice bright and professional. North Star Financial Group. How may I direct your call? Accounting department, please, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. A one-moment hold music classical. Something by Vivaldi filled my ear. I stared at my notebook, where I'd written Julian's claims, circling the numbers over and over. 7 months. 1,000 per month. Where had it gone? Accounting. This is Janet speaking. How can I help you? The voice was younger, warmer than the receptionist. I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. Shakti Stuka. Good afternoon, Janet. My name is Gary Brooks. I'm calling about a family financial matter that I believe your office might be able to help me with. Oh. Of course, Mr. Brooks. What kind of matter are we talking about? I need to verify some transactions. My son-in-law, Julian Pierce, told me he's been making monthly payments on my behalf through your company. 7 payments of $6,000 each. Starting in May of last year, there was a pause. The sound of typing. Julian Pierce. Yes, I see his account here. He's married to Nancy Brooks, one of our senior analysts. Let me pull up his transaction history. More typing. I waited, my pulse steady but loud in my ears. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a car drove past, tires crunching on snow-packed streets. Yes, Mr. Brooks, Janet said, her tone shifting slightly more cautious. Now I do see 7 transfers from Mr. Pierce's personal account. Each one is $6,000 made monthly from May through November. They were transferred to an account listed under your name. My grip tightened on the phone, but I never received that money. I checked with my bank this morning. There's nothing. Another pause, longer this time, that's concerning. Let me look at the destination account more carefully. More clicking, more typing. When Janet spoke again, her voice had dropped to something quieter, almost conspiratorial. Mr. Brooks, this account, the one receiving the transfers, it's a subsidiary account. It was opened in your name. But she hesitated. But what I asked, though part of me already knew, but it was opened by Mr. Pierce. The signature on file shows you as the account holder. But all the authorization and access controls are under his name. He's listed as the primary manager for elderly care purposes. The room tilted slightly. I pressed my palm flat against the table, grounding myself. Elderly care purposes. Yes, sir, it's a type of account, sometimes set up for family members who need assistance managing their finances. The account is technically in your name, but he has full control over deposits, withdrawals, everything. Can you tell me the account number? I asked. Pulling my pen closer, Janet read it slowly. Account ending in 7439, I wrote it, DEC. Own, staring at the digits. I'd never seen this number before, never opened this account, never authorized Julian to do anything on my behalf. Monica. Inmai said carefully, can you tell me what happened to the money after it was transferred? Was it withdrawn? Transferred again? Mr. Brooks, I'm not sure I should be sharing this level of detail without proper authorization, I please, I said, and I didn't hide the urgency in my voice. I'm 68 years old. I've been living on food stamps and a broken heater for 7 months because I thought I had no other options. If someone has been using my name to move money around, I need to know silence. Then Janet's voice softer. Hold on. The hold music returned briefly before she came back. Mr. Brooks, I checked with my supervisor. Given the circumstances, we can provide you with basic transaction information. After the money was transferred into that account, there were multiple withdrawals and additional transfers. The largest ones were, let me see. She paused, and I heard papers rustling. There's an $18,000 payment to something called Lakeview Property Holdings, a $4,500 charge to a travel agency for tickets to the Bahamas, multiple charges at high-end retailers, and the rest appears to have been withdrawn in cash over several months. My hand stopped moving across the page. I'd written the numbers down automatically, but now they swam before my eyes. 18,000, 4,500, the Bahamas luxury stores. None of it for me. None of it for a car. None of it for anything. Julian had claimed, Mr. Brooks. Janet's voice pulled me back. Are you still there? Yes, I said quietly. I'm here. I'm so sorry. This doesn't seem right at all. You should probably contact your bank and possibly report this as fraud or talk to your family about what's happening. Thank you, Janet, I said. You've been very helpful. More than you know. Is there anything else I can do? No, you've given me exactly what I needed. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my kitchen, staring at the numbers I'd just written, an account in my name that I'd never opened, controlled by a man I'd never authorized, filled with money that had never reached me, $42,000 gone spent on property vacations, luxuries while I wore 2 coats indoors and ate soup from the food bank. I set the phone down gently and stared at the string of numbers I'd just written, an account bearing my name but opened by someone else, someone I trusted with my daughter's happiness. And now I knew Julian hadn't been taking care of me. He'd been stealing from me while making Nancy believe he was being generous. The question was, did Nancy know? 3 days later, a firm knock on my door cut through the silence I'd been living in. I'd spent those 3 days at my kitchen table, filling pages of my notebook with numbers, dates, questions that had no answers yet. The house remained cold, the broken heater still broken, my 2 coats still necessary, but the chill I felt had less to do with temperature and more to do with the growing certainty that Julian Pierce had been systematically stealing from me while pretending to be generous. The knock came again, more insistent this time. I set down my pen and walked to the door, my joints protesting the movement. Through the frosted window, I could see a figure in a dark overcoat, holding a briefcase. Not Julian. This man was older, broader, with silver hair, visible even through the distorted glass. I opened the door. Mr. Brooks, the man said, extending his hand. My name is Martin Reynolds. I'm the chief accountant at North Star Financial Group. Janet told me about your phone call. May I come in? I studied him for a moment, the tired eyes, the expensive but worn suit, the briefcase that looked heavy with more than just papers. He had the demeanor of someone who'd worked with numbers long enough to know when they told stories people didn't want heard. Please, I said. Stepping aside, Martin entered, stamping snow from his shoes on the mat, with the kind of courtesy that felt automatic. He looked around my small living room, the patched furniture, the thermostat set to barely livable, the stack of bills I still hadn't hidden, and something in his expression softened. Can I offer you coffee? I asked, leading him to the kitchen table. That would be kind, thank you. I made coffee the way I always did. Careful, measured, making the ground stretch as far as possible. Martin sat at the table, setting his briefcase beside his chair, saying nothing while I worked. It was a comfortable silence, the kind shared by men who understood that some conversations required patience when I set the mugs down. Martin wrapped his hands around his, warming them. Mr. Brooks, I think there are some things you need to know. After Janet spoke with you, I reviewed the accounts myself more thoroughly than we normally would, and I said, sitting across from him. Martin opened his briefcase and withdrew a folder thick, organized, marked with tabs. What I found concerned me enough that I felt I needed to tell you in person. He opened the folder, turning it so I could see bank statements, transfer receipts, account authorization forms, all printed on official North Star financial letterhead. These are copies, Martin said, pointing to the first page. The originals are in our files, but I thought you should have documentation of your own. 7 transfers from Julian Pierce's personal account, starting May 15th of last year and ending November 15th. Each transfer was exactly $6,000. I looked at the numbers, clean, precise, undeniable. May $6,000, June $6,000, July through November. The same total. At the bottom of the page, $42,000. They went to an account opened in your name. Martin continued flipping to another page, account number ending in 7.4, 3.9. But here's where it gets complicated. He pulled out another document, an account authorization form. My name was typed at the top. Gary Matthew Brooks below it. A signature that looked like mine but wasn't. The loops were wrong. The angle of the G too sharp. This signature, Martin said. Quiet. Lie was used to open the account. But when I compared it to your signature on file, from when you opened your original checking account, decades ago, he pulled out another paper. My actual signature from 1983, shaky but clearly mine, they don't match. I stared at the 2 signatures side by side. Someone had forged my name. Someone had created an account in my name, moved $42,000 into it, and spent every penny without my knowledge or consent. Julian Pierce is listed as the account manager, Martin said, his voice taking on an edge I hadn't heard before. He signed all the authorization papers, claiming you needed assistance managing your finances due to age-related cognitive decline. The words hit me like a physical blow. Cognitive decline, as if I was senile, as if I couldn't be trusted with my own money. I'm 68, I said, my voice tight. Not 98. I balance my checkbook to the penny. I solve crosswords. I remember everything I know, Martin said gently. Janet told me how clearly you spoke on the phone, how precisely you remember dates and amounts. That's why I'm here, because what Julian Pierce did, he paused, choosing his words carefully. What he did was fraudulent financial exploitation, and it's illegal. I sat back, the coffee forgotten, my mind working through the implications. Where did the money go? Martin flipped to another section, this one filled with withdrawal records, multiple places, 18,000 to something called Lakeview Property Holdings, I checked. And it's a real estate investment under Julian's name, 4,500 to a travel agency for flights and accommodations in the Bahamas, several thousand at luxury retailers, and the rest withdrawn as cash over several months. Each number was another betrayal, another lie. Another month I'd spent struggling, while Julian used my name to fund his lifestyle. Does Nancy know? I asked the question I'd been avoiding for 3 days. Martin's expression darkened. That's harder to say. She works in a different department. She wouldn't have access to her husband's personal accounts. It's possible. She believed his story about the car and the payments, or he hesitated, or she was part of it. I finished. I can't say for certain, but Mr. Brooks, Martin leaned forward, his voice dropping. There's something else you need to know. Martin's hand paused on the briefcase. His voice lowered. Mr. Brooks, there's one more thing you need to know. Martin wasn't finished. He pulled more papers from his briefcase, receipts, invoices, statements I'd never seen before. You'd, on top of the transfers themselves, Martin said, spreading the documents across my kitchen table. There were additional expenses charged directly to that account. Significant ones. I leaned forward, studying the papers. Each one was a knife wound, precise and deliberate. Martin pointed to the first receipt. This is from Lakeview Property Holdings, an $18,000 payment made in June, weeks after the account was opened. I did some research. Lakeview is a real estate investment firm. They purchase commercial properties and rent them out. This particular payment was the down payment on a small office building in Bloomington. Under Julian's name, I asked, though I already knew the answer. Yes, the property is registered solely to him. No mention of you, no shared ownership. He used your money he claimed was for your care to invest in real estate that benefits only him. I stared at the receipt, at Julian's signature at the bottom, bold and unapologetic. $18,000, more than half a year of my pension, gone in a single transaction for a building I'd never see, profits I'd never share. Martin pulled out another document, this one from a travel agency. This is from July, a $4,500 charge for 2 round-trip tickets to Nassau, Bahamas. First-class flights, 5-star resort. All-inclusive package for 1 week for Julian and Nancy. I said quietly. Yes, I cross-referenced the dates with Nancy's time-off requests. At work she took vacation that week. She and Julian were in the Bahamas while you, Martin paused, his eyes flicking to my 2 coats hanging by the door, to the thermostat set to barely livable. While you were here, the irony wasn't lost on me, Nancy and Julian, sipping cocktails on white sand beaches, swimming in turquoise water, dining at expensive restaurants, all funded by money stolen in my name, while I rationed soup and wore layers indoors because I couldn't afford to fix my heater. Did Nancy know where the money came from? I asked. Martin's expression was careful. That's what I've been trying to determine. Nancy works in investment analysis, not accounting. She wouldn't have access to Julian's personal financial records. It's possible, he told her, the trip was paid for by a bonus or savings or some other explanation, whether she believed him. He shrugged. I can't say for certain. Part of me wanted to believe Nancy was innocent, that my daughter wouldn't knowingly participate in stealing from her own father. But another part, the part that remembered her brief visits, her distracted phone calls, her relief when I said I was fine, wondered if she'd simply chosen not to ask questions because the answers would be inconvenient. Martin continued pulling out more receipts. There are also charges to luxury car rentals, a Lexus for 3 months, $2,400, charges at high-end restaurants in downtown Minneapolis, designer clothing stores, a country club membership fee. Each receipt was another humiliation, another month I'd struggled, while Julian lived lavishly on money he'd stolen, using my name. My forged signature, my fabricated cognitive decline as justification. How much total, I asked. Martin consulted his notes. Beyond the $42,000 transferred, the account shows an additional $5,800 in direct charges before it was depleted completely, so $47,800 total, all spent within 7 months. $47,800. I thought about what that money could have done. Fixed my heater, bought groceries without rationing, paid for the prescriptions I'd been skipping, to save money, maybe even bought a used car. Not a 196. 5 Mustang, but something reliable, something real. Instead, it had funded Julian's investments, vacations, and lifestyle, while he convinced my daughter, and anyone who asked, that he was taking care of me, Mr. Brooks. Martin said, his voice dropping lower. More serious, I need you to understand something. Men like Julian Pierce don't give up easily when they're cornered. If you confront him with this evidence, if you take legal action, he will fight back. He'll try to discredit you, claim you're confused or forgetful. He's already laid the groundwork by putting cognitive decline in the account documentation. I'm not confused, I said firmly, and I'm not forgetful, and I know that. But he'll try to make others believe you are. He'll pressure Nancy to support his version of events. He might even try to intimidate you, make you feel like pursuing this isn't worth the trouble. I looked at Martin, this man I'd met 30 minutes ago, who'd taken time from his own life to bring me evidence, to warn me, to help me understand what had been done to me. Why are you doing this? I asked. You don't know me. This isn't your problem. Martin's expression softened. My father died 5 years ago. He was a widower, living alone, managing fine. Then his caretaker, someone he trusted, started draining his accounts, small amounts at first, then larger. By the time we noticed she'd taken nearly $30,000, we reported it, but she'd covered her tracks well enough that, proving it was difficult, my father died before we could get justice for him. He paused, his jaw tight. I see the same pattern here, someone taking advantage of a decent person who's too proud to ask for help. Too isolated to notice until it's too late. I won't let that happen again if I can prevent it. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Martin stood, gathering the papers and placing them carefully in a folder which he handed to me. These are copies for your records. Keep them somewhere safe, and Mr. Brooks, be careful. Document everything. If Julian contacts you, write it down. If he his threats, record them. If you can build your case carefully, I will, I said, standing to shake his hand. Thank you, Martin. Truly, you're welcome. And if you need anything, if things get complicated, here's my card. Call me. He left his footsteps fading down my front walk. I stood at the window, watching his car disappear into the winter afternoon. Then I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by evidence. That night, I opened my old notebook and carefully wrote, Julian Pierce, fraud, $42,000 plus expenses. I will not let this go that night. My phone rang. It was Nancy. I had been sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing the documents Martin left behind: receipts, transfer records, and the forged signature that wasn't mine. The evidence of Julian's theft lay spread before me, like pieces of a puzzle that finally formed a clear, damning picture. The ringing cut through the silence. I picked up on the third ring, recognizing Nancy's name on the screen. Hi, sweetheart, I said, keeping my voice even. Dad, her voice sounded tight, more worried than I'd heard in months. Are you okay? I'm fine. Why do you ask? There was a pause, careful and deliberate. Julian said, you called his office, that you were asking about money, about accounts and transfers. So Julian already knew. Martin had warned me this would happen. Once I started asking questions, I just hadn't expected him to react so fast. I was checking on some things, I said calmly, making sure everything adds up in order. Nancy's voice lifted. Dad, Julian said you sounded confused, that you were asking about accounts that don't exist, saying you never received money that was sent to you. My jaw tightened, but I kept my tone steady. Nancy, I asked specific questions about specific transactions. There was nothing confused about it, I know. But she hesitated. He's worried about you, we both are. You've been alone a long time. And sometimes when people get older, Nancy, I interrupted gently but firmly. I'm 68, not 88. My mind is clear. I know that, Dad, of course I do. But Julian thinks you've been, under stress, that maybe things are harder to keep track of. He said, you asked about a Ford Mustang he gave you, but you claimed you never got it. There it was, Julian's story already forming. The generous son-in-law caring for an aging father-in-law who couldn't remember the help he'd received. Forgetfulness decline a perfect cover, Nancy, I said carefully. I never received a Ford Mustang. I never received any payments. I've lived on my pension and Social Security for 7 months. That's the truth. But Julian showed me receipts. He's been paying $6,000 a month for what I asked. What did he say the money was for? She hesitated. For your care, the car insurance, making sure you had everything you needed. And did you ever see the car, I asked. Did you ever come here and see this Mustang? Silence long enough to answer the question. You haven't visited in 4 months, I said quietly. How would you know what I have? That's not fair, she said quickly. I've been busy. Julian said he was checking on you, that everything was fine. Everything is not fine, I replied. My voice firm, but not for the reasons Julian is suggesting. What do you mean I wanted to tell her everything? About the forged signature, the fraudulent account, the money spent on Julian's investments while I wore coats indoors, but Martin's warning echoed in my head. Julian would fight back, and Nancy might not be ready to hear it. Nancy, I asked instead, has Julian suggested I see a doctor? Another pause. He mentioned it might be a good idea, just a checkup to make sure everything's okay. Cognitively, Dad, there's nothing wrong with that. People our age, I repeated, you're 41, I'm 68. That's not the same thing. You know what I mean? Older adults should have regular screenings. My memory is fine. I said evenly, I remember every conversation we've had this year. I remember you called 3 weeks ago about a charity gala. I remember you texted on Christmas. I remember your last visit in September. Lasted 20 minutes because you had dinner reservations. Silence again. Nay, I appreciate your concern. I continued more gently. But I'm not confused when someone claims they sent me money I never received. I ask questions. That's not decline. That's common sense, Dad. Julian wouldn't lie, she said quietly. He's my husband. He loves me. He's been generous to you. That was the truth she was clinging to. Admitting Julian lied meant admitting her marriage was built on deception. I'm sure he loves you. I said carefully, but that doesn't mean everything he says is true. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting I verify facts. Is that unreasonable? Her voice hardened. Maybe you should see a doctor. Not because Julian asked, but because I'm asking for my peace of mind. I understood then what Julian had done. He'd turned my daughter into his shield. If I refused, I'd seem defensive. If I agreed, he'd twist it into proof of decline, regardless of results. I'll think about it, I said, but ask Julian something for me. Ask to see the car documents, delivery records, insurance registration. He has them, then asking won't hurt. If he's telling the truth, the paperwork will speak for itself. A long silence. Okay, she said softly. I'll ask. Thank you. I love you. I love you too, Dad. The call ended. I sat alone, phone in my hand. Julian wasn't just stealing money. He was trying to steal my credibility, my sanity, my voice. But I taught math for 35 years. I knew how to prove truth with evidence. Julian Pierce had underestimated me, and I was going to prove it. The next morning, I called an old friend I hadn't seen in 15 years, Gregory Walsh. We had taught together at Roosevelt High School in the 80s. Me in math, Gregory in history. He had been brilliant, deeply passionate about constitutional law and civil rights, the kind of teacher who challenged students to think critically after 10 years in the classroom. He went to law school believing he could do more good in courtrooms than hallways. We hadn't stayed close. Life intervened. Marie became ill. Gregory built his practice. Still, I followed his career from a distance and heard he'd specialized in elder law, representing seniors who had been exploited or abused. Now I needed him. The phone rang twice before a receptionist answered. Walsh and Associates, I'd like to speak with Gregory Walsh. Tell him it's Gary Brooks, an old colleague from Roosevelt. Please hold a moment later. Gregory's voice came through older, steadier, but unmistakable. Gary Brooks. It's been a long time. Too long. I said, Gregory, I need legal help. There was a pause, then his tone sharpened. Tell me what's going on. Can we meet in person? Of course, 2 o'clock this afternoon, I'll be there. Gregory's office was on the 12th floor of a building on Nicollet Avenue, overlooking downtown Minneapolis. Snow drifted past the windows as the receptionist LED'd me to a conference room. Gregory stood to shake my hand. He'd aged well. Silver hair, glasses, the same analytical eyes I remembered from faculty. Meetings he'd gestured for me to sit. It's good to see you, Gary. Though I wish it were under better circumstances. Start from the beginning. I told him everything. New Year's Eve. Nancy's question about the Mustang, Julian's claims the bank visit. I showed him the documents Martin Reynolds had given me. The forged signature, the transfer records, the expenses, $18,000 for a real estate investment, $4,500 for a Bahamas vacation, luxury spending while I rationed food. Gregory listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back and removed his glasses, polishing them slowly. A habit from our teaching days. This is textbook elder financial exploitation, he said. Your son-in-law forged your signature, opened a fraudulent account, transferred funds, and spent them for personal benefit while claiming it was for your care under Minnesota law. That's a felony, I know, I said, but I'm not filing charges yet. He raised an eyebrow. Why not? Because Nancy doesn't believe me. She believes Julian. If I go to the police now, he'll frame it as a confused old man making accusations. He's already planting that idea to Elling her. I'm forgetful, suggesting I need a doctor. Gregory nodded. Gaslighting, classic tactic. So I need Nancy to see the truth herself, I said. Not from me, but from Julian exposing himself. You want a confrontation? Gregory said, with evidence with Nancy present. Yes. A dinner at my house. Calm, ordinary. I'll have the documentation ready. I'd like you there as a witness. Gregory smiled faintly. A trap, a controlled one. I said, Julian walks in thinking he's still in charge. That's smart. Gregory said, if Nancy watches him lie under pressure, it becomes much harder for him to manipulate her. Afterward. But first, Gregory continued, his voice serious. We need to shut down his narrative. He's questioning your mental capacity. You need proof he's wrong. How a cognitive assessment, a standardized evaluation by a licensed psychologist, if you score well, it destroys his argument and strengthens your credibility. I bristled. I shouldn't have to prove I'm sane. You shouldn't. Gregory agreed, but refusing plays into his hands. Take the test and you control the narrative. I considered it. He was right. Fine. I said, I'll do it. I'll arrange it with Dr. Patricia Morrison. He said she specializes in elder assessments, memory reasoning, executive function, a full battery. You sound confident. You finished crossword puzzles? Faster than anyone I knew, he said. Your mind is sharp, Gary. We'll just document it. We spent the next hour planning. The dinner would be in 2 weeks. Enough time for the assessment, not enough to raise suspicion. Gregory would prepare a legal summary of the evidence, if Nancy saw the truth. We'd decide next steps together. One more thing, Gregory said, as I stood. Be careful. If Julian realizes you're building a case, he may escalate. Document everything. And if he threatens you call me, I will. We shook hands, and I left, feeling something I hadn't felt in days. Hope, not just for justice, but for my daughter, to free her from a man who had deceived us both. When I stepped outside, snow was falling again. I had 2 tasks ahead of me: prove I was completely sound of mind, and prepare to confront the man who had stolen from me. While smiling to my face 2 days later, I sat in a doctor's office taking a cognitive assessment. The office was at St. Mary's Medical Centre, a modern building with 2 bright fluorescent lights and the antiseptic smell of medical facilities. Dr. Patricia Patterson, the psychologist Gregory had recommended, sat across from me with a clipboard, her expression professional but kind. Mr. Brooks, she said, I understand. You're here for a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. Can you tell me why you're requesting this assessment? I chose my words carefully. My family has expressed concern about my memory and mental clarity. I want documented proof that my cognitive function is intact. She nodded, making a note. That's a reasonable request. We'll go through several standardized tests today. Please answer as accurately as you can, and don't worry if you don't know something. That's normal. Ready to begin. Ready. She started with the mini mental state examination, the MMSE, a test I'd researched beforehand, not to cheat, but to understand what would be assessed: orientation to time and place memory, attention and calculation. Language skills. What is today's date? She asked. January 7th. Where are we right now? St. Mary's Medical Center. 12th floor, Minneapolis, Minnesota, United States. I'm going to say 3 words. Please repeat them after me. Apple table penny. Apple table penny. Well, now can you count backward from 100 by 7s? I've done this calculation thousands of times. Teaching students about sequences: 93, 86, 79, 72, 65. Excellent. Now can you recall those 3 words? I asked you to remember. Apple table penny. She continued through the assessment, asking me to name objects. Follow 3-step commands. Read and obey. Written instructions. Write a complete sentence. Copy a geometric design. Each task was simple, almost insultingly so, but I understood their purpose. They were designed to catch deficits loss. App says signs of cognitive decline. I had none after an hour. Dr. Patterson set down her clipboard and smiled. Mr. Brooks, your cognitive function is excellent. You scored 30 out of 30 on the MMSI, which indicates no impairment whatsoever. Your memory, reasoning, attention, and language skills are all well within normal ranges for your age. In fact, above average in several areas. Relief flooded through me, though I'd known I would pass. Can you provide that in writing? Of course, I'll prepare a formal report documenting today's assessment. You should have it within 24 hours. Thank you, Doctor. That evening, I scanned the document and emailed it to Nancy. No explanation, no commentary, just the report with its clear conclusion: cognitive function intact. No evidence of memory impairment or cognitive decline. I didn't call her afterward. I wanted her to sit with that information, to see the professional, objective proof that her husband's narrative was false. 3 hours later, my phone rang Julian. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello, Julian? His voice was smooth concerned, the same tone he'd used on New Year's Eve when he'd asked about the Mustang. Gary, hi. Nancy showed me the test results. That's great news, really? Great. Yes, it is, though. You know. He paused, and I could hear the calculation in the silence. Sometimes early signs of decline are subtle, hard to catch even with standard tests. Have you considered seeing a neurologist? Getting a more specialized evaluation? There it was even faced with evidence. Julian was trying to undermine it, to suggest the assessment wasn't thorough enough, that there might still be something wrong with me that justified his claims. I felt anger rise in my chest, but I kept my voice cold and steady. Julian, my mind is completely sound. Sound enough to know exactly what you've been doing. Silence longer. This time I don't know what you mean, he said finally, his tone shifting less smooth, more guarded. Yes, you do the account you opened in my name, the $42,000 you transfer. Ed and spent on yourself. The forged signature, the Mustang that never existed, I know all of it. Another pause when Julian spoke again. His voice had hardened. Gary, I think you're confused. I've been trying to help you. And now you're making accusations that don't make sense. This is exactly the kind of paranoia that proves I'm losing my mind. I cut him off. I have documents, Julian, bank records, transfer receipts. Proof of where every dollar went. $18,000 for your real estate investment. $4,500 for a vacation to the Bahamas. I have it all. Silence, complete silence. I don't understand what you're talking about, Julian said, but his voice had lost its confidence. I need to go. We'll discuss this later. He hung up. I set the phone down, my hand steady. Julian was worried. Now I'd shown him. I wasn't the confused old man he'd tried to portray. I had evidence, and I wasn't backing down. That night, there was a knock at my door, firm, familiar. I opened it to find Frank Wilson standing on my porch. A broad-shouldered man in his 70s, a veteran I'd known through the VFW for 20 years. We'd shared coffee at meetings, swapped stories about teaching and service, maintained a quiet friendship built on mutual respect. Frank, I said, surprised. What are you doing here? She heard through the grapevine. You're having some trouble, he said. Simply, thought you might want some company. I hadn't told anyone at the VFW about Julian, but word travels in small communities, especially among veterans who look after their own. Come in, I said. Frank entered his eyes, scanning my house with the practiced observation of someone who'd spent years assessing situations. For threats, he saw the cold thermostat, the worn furniture, the stack of legal documents on my kitchen table. Gary, he said, his voice steady and serious. I'm going to stay here until this is over. I'll sleep on your couch. Keep an eye on things. You don't argue with me about this. I looked at him, this man I barely knew outside of monthly meetings, offering protection without being asked, understanding instinctively that Julian Pierce might be more dangerous than I'd anticipated. Thank you, Frank, I said quietly. He nodded. You'd do the same for me that night. Frank Wilson stayed. He made coffee. Sat at my kitchen table, reviewing the documents I showed him. And when I went to bed, He remained in the living room, alert and watchful. Something told me I was going to need him. Martin Reynolds's phone rang at 11 on a Tuesday night. He had been getting ready for bed, teeth-brushed glasses set on the nightstand, the lamp casting a warm circle of light over a mystery novel. He was too tired to read his wife. Catherine slept beside him, her breathing slow and uneven after another round of chemotherapy. Earlier that afternoon, the ringtone shattered the quiet. Martin reached for the phone immediately, not wanting to wake her unknown number. He considered ignoring it. Nothing good ever came from late-night calls like this. But something told him to answer. "Hello." A calm, polished voice came through the line. "Mr. Reynolds, this is Julian Pierce." Martin sat up straight. Julian Pierce, the man whose financial misconduct Martin had uncovered and documented for Gary Brooks only days earlier. "Mr. Pierce," Martin said carefully, "it's late, I know, and I apologize." Julian replied smoothly, "But this is important. It concerns my father-in-law." Martin said nothing. "I'm sure you've noticed Gary hasn't been himself lately." Julian continued confusion, memory problems, paranoia. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you love decline. Martin recognized the tactic instantly, establishing a narrative of cognitive impairment despite Gary's clean assessment. "I'm an accountant, not a physician," Martin said evenly. "I'm not qualified to comment on anyone's mental health." "Of course," Julian said lightly. "But you did meet with Gary. You provided him with financial documents. He's been misinterpreting." "I provided accurate records from North Star Financial Group." Martin replied nothing more. Julian's voice remained friendly, but there was steel beneath it. "The problem, Martin, may I call you Martin, is that Gary is making accusations that could seriously harm my reputation and my marriage accusations, based on documents he doesn't fully understand. Because of his condition, his cognitive evaluation shows normal function," Martin said flatly. A brief pause. "Evaluations aren't perfect. Early decline often slips past standard testing." Martin felt anger rise but kept his tone calm. "Why are you calling me Mr. Pierce?" Julian sighed softly. "Because I know you value accuracy, and I also know papers rustled. I know your wife. Catherine is being treated for stage 3 breast cancer." Martin's grip tightened around the phone. "My wife's health is none of your business." "Of course not." Julian said quickly. "I only mention it because medical treatment is expensive. Chemotherapy follow UPS medications. Even with insurance, the costs are overwhelming." Martin's mind raced. They had told almost no one about Catherine's diagnosis. "I want to help," Julian continued gently. "You believed you were helping Gary, but the situation is more complex. I'd like to clear up the misunderstanding before it escalates." "Escalates how?" Martin asked. "If Gary continues, it will only convince everyone, including Nancy, that he's unstable, will be forced to pursue conservatorship, take over his finances for his own protection. That would devastate him." The threat was clear. "What are you suggesting?" Martin asked. "I'm suggesting we resolve this quietly. You've been under stress. It would be understandable if the documents you provided were incomplete or misinterpreted. An honest error. An honest error." Martin repeated, "Yes, and to support you during Catherine's treatment, I'd like to offer financial help, $50,000, enough to ease the burden." No strings attached there. It was the bribe. Martin's hand moved suddenly, opening the recording app on his phone. He pressed record. $50,000, Martin said neutrally. "That's generous. I believe in helping people," Julian replied. "And I believe." "You understand that truth isn't always as simple as paperwork. Let me be clear," Martin said, slowly articulating each word for the recording. "You're offering me money in exchange for telling Gary Brooks that the financial records I gave him were inaccurate. Records showing transfers into an account he did not open or control." Julian hesitated. "I'm offering assistance while we clarify misunderstandings by retracting my statements. I wouldn't say retract, more like contextualize." Martin felt sick. This was witness tampering, bribery, coercion. That's quite an offer. Martin said calmly, I'll need time to think. Of course, Julian said, but time matters, Gary's condition could worsen, and Catherine deserves the best care possible. Opportunities like this don't last, the threat hung heavy. I understand, Martin said, I'll be in touch. Julian ended the call. Martin remained still, letting the recording continue in silence. Before stopping it, he immediately saved it to multiple locations, cloud storage email, and an encrypted folder. Catherine shifted beside him. Who was that? She murmured. Work. Martin said softly. Go back to sleep. She did. Martin sat in the dark, staring at his phone. Julian Pierce had just committed another felony, and this time Martin had proof. Julian's voice grew sharper. Martin, let me be clear with you. Martin sat motionless in the dim bedroom, his phone on speaker. The recording app still running, Catherine slept beside him, her breathing soft and even, unaware of the threat being leveled against them, in hushed tones. You have two choices, Julian continued, his earlier pretense of friendliness stripped away. Accept my offer, $50,000 in cash. And you simply forget a few details about that subsidiary account. Tell Gary you made an error in the documentation, that you misunderstood the account structure easy. Martin let silence hang for a moment, as if he were considering, that's a substantial amount of money, but my career, my reputation at North Star, your reputation. Julian's laugh was cold. Martin let be honest, you're a mid-level accountant at a firm where dozens of people do exactly what you do. You're replaceable. And if you choose not to accept my generous offer, I'll make sure you're replaced. What do you mean? I mean, I have connections at North Star Financial, board members, senior partners, people who trust my judgment. If I tell them that you've been providing confidential client information to unauthorized parties, which technically you did when you gave those documents to Gary, they'll terminate you immediately. Breach of confidentiality, violation of privacy protocols, you'd be lucky to find work at another financial firm. In this city? Martin's hand tightened on the phone. He forced his voice to sound uncertain. Frightened, Mr. Pierce. I have a family I can't afford to lose exactly. Julian cut in smoothly. You can't afford to lose your job. More importantly, you can't afford to lose your health insurance. Catherine needs that insurance, doesn't she? Stage 3 breast cancer, the treatment costs are astronomical. Without coverage, chemotherapy, radiation surgery, if it comes to that, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. Martin felt his jaw clench. Julian was threatening his wife's health care, her survival as leverage to cover up his crimes. So you understand my position? Julian continued. This isn't personal, Martin. It's just practical. You help me clear up this misunderstanding with Gary. I help you financially, everyone wins. Or you refuse, lose your job, lose your insurance, and watch your family struggle, while Gary continues to make accusations that make him look increasingly senile. Martin swallowed, keeping his voice shaky. This is a lot to process. I'm sure it is. But think about it from my perspective. I've been nothing but generous to Gary. I tried to help him, tried to make his life easier, and now he's accusing me of theft, of fraud, simply because he doesn't remember or understand what actually happened. It's heartbreaking. But the documents are complicated, Julian said sharply. Financial arrangements between family members often are. You saw one piece of a larger picture and drew conclusions without context. That's understandable, but it's also correctable. Martin forced himself to sound hesitant. Conflicted? I don't know if I can. Martin, Julian's voice dropped to something harder, more menacing. Tomorrow night, 8 gas parking lot behind Nicolette Mall. The south entrance. I'll have the cash, $50,000 in unmarked bills. You bring a simple written statement saying you reviewed the records more thoroughly and realized you'd made errors. In your initial assessment, 2 sentences, that's all. Tomorrow night. Martin repeated slowly, as if processing 8 p.m. sharp. And Martin, this offer expires after tomorrow. If you're not there, I'll assume you've made your choice, and I'll make mine. I'll contact North Star's compliance department first thing Friday morning with evidence of your unauthorized disclosure of confidential information. You'll be fired by noon. Your insurance will be cancelled within 30 days. And Catherine, he paused meaningfully, Catherine will have to figure out how to pay for treatment without coverage. Martin let the silence stretch, making Julian believe he was breaking, that the threats were working. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, Martin. But I'm offering you a way to make it easier. $50,000. That's more than most people see in cash in their entire lives. Think about what you could do with that money. Pay off medical bills, take Catherine somewhere nice when she's recovered, set aside college funds for your kids. All you have to do is admit to a minor mistake. That hurts no one. It would hurt Gary, Martin said quietly. Gary is already hurt by age, by confusion, by the natural decline that comes to all of us. Eventually, you'd be helping him really, preventing him from pursuing a vendetta that will only embarrass him and destroy his relationship with Nancy. You'd be doing the compassionate thing. The manipulation was masterful. Julian had reframed Ed theft as compassion, witness tampering as kindness, threats as practical advice. I need time to think, Martin said, his voice unsteady. You have until tomorrow at 8 p.m. Don't make the wrong choice. Martin, for your sake, for Catherine's sake. The line went dead. Martin sat in the darkness, phone still recording silence. He let it run for another 30 seconds, then stopped the recording and immediately saved it. The recording was clear. Crystal clear. Julian Pierce had committed multiple felonies in a single phone call. Witness tampering, bribery, extortion, threats against employment. He'd offered specific cash amounts, set a specific meeting time and location, threatened specific consequences, and Martin had every word. He opened his laptop quietly, not wanting to wake Catherine, and uploaded the recording to 3 separate cloud storage accounts, emailed copies to himself at 2 different email addresses, and saved encrypted versions to 2 USB drives. He labeled the file clearly, Julian Pierce Witness, Tampering, January 8th. Then he composed a brief email to Gregory Walsh, Gary's attorney, attaching the recording. Gregory Julian Pierce called me tonight and attempted to bribe me $50,000 cash to recant my testimony regarding the fraudulent account. He also threatened my employment and my wife's health insurance. If I refuse, the attached recording documents the entire conversation. He's requested a meeting tomorrow night at 8 p.m. in the Nicolette Mall South parking lot to exchange cash for false testimony. I believe we should contact law enforcement immediately. Martin Reynolds, he hit send. Then Martin sat in the darkness, staring at his phone. The recording was pristine. Tomorrow, everything would change. On Sunday afternoon, I set the table with Marie's china, the beautiful plates she'd always saved for special occasions. The dishes were delicate porcelain, with blue floral patterns along the edges. Bought piece by piece over years from an antique shop on Hennepin Avenue. Marie had used them, maybe a do. Zen times in 40 years of marriage. Thanksgiving, Christmas. Nancy's graduation anniversaries. Each time she'd wash them by hand afterward, wrap them carefully in tissue paper, and return them to the cabinet where they waited for the next moment worth celebrating. This wasn't a celebration, but it was significant. I'd woken early, driven by purpose, and a strange calm I hadn't felt in weeks. The pot roast had been simmering since 9:00 a.m., the same recipe Marie used to make, the one Nancy had loved as a child. Beef carrots, potatoes, onions, and a rich gravy that filled the house with warmth and the illusion of normality. Frank had helped me clean, moving furniture back into place, vacuuming corners I'd neglected during the cold months. He didn't ask many questions, just worked steadily beside me, understanding that tonight mattered. You sure you want to do this? Frank asked, as we arranged chairs around the table. I'm sure, I said. Nancy needs to see the truth herself, not hear it from me, not read it in documents. She needs to watch him lie to my face. Frank nodded, setting down the last chair. I'll be in the next room if you need me. Thank you. At 5:30, I changed into my best shirt, a button-down Marie had given me, years ago pressed and clean. I checked my reflection in the bathroom mirror. It's 8 years old. Thinner than I used to be, but clear-eyed and steady. Not the confused, declining man Julian had tried to portray, at 6 exactly. The doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Nancy and Julian on my porch. Nancy smiled, stepping forward to hug me, brief but genuine, smelling of expensive perfume and winter air. Hi, Dad. The house smells amazing pot roast. I said your favourite. Her smile widened. I can't believe you remembered. Behind her, Julian extended his hand, his expression pleasant and composed. Gary, thank you for having us. I shook his hand. Meeting his eyes, he held my gaze without flinching. Confident, comfortable, he believed he was in control, that this was just another family dinner, another opportunity to main. Tain his facade. Come in, I said. Everything's ready. We moved to the dining room. Nancy's eyes widened when she saw Marie's china laid out, the pot roast steaming in the centre of the table, candles lit despite the early hour. Dad, this is beautiful. You didn't have to go to all this trouble. It's not trouble, I said, pulling out her chair. It's nice to have you both here. Julian sat across from me, his posture relaxed, his hands folded on the table. He looked like a man without a care in the world, not someone who'd threatened a witness 3 nights ago, who'd offered bribes and made extortion calls. I served the food passing plates, pouring water. We talked about safe things. Nancy's work, a new client she'd landed, the unseasonably cold weather plans for spring. Julian contributed easily, telling a story about a colleague's mishap that made Nancy laugh for 15 minutes. It was almost normal, almost like we were a real family sharing a real meal. Not 3 people engaged in an elaborate performance where 2 didn't know they were actors. I ate slowly, watching Julian. He was good. I had to give him that. His smile never slipped. His attention to Nancy never wavered. He complimented the pot roast, asked about the recipe, mentioned how much he appreciated home-cooked meals. This is wonderful, Gary, he said, cutting another piece of beef. You're a better cook than I expected. Jean-Marie taught me, I said quietly. She believed a man should know his way around a kitchen. She was a wise woman. Nancy reached across the table, squeezing my hand. I miss her too, Dad. I know you do, sweetheart. The moment hung there, tender and real. For just a second, I saw my daughter, not Julian's wife, not the successful analyst in her designer clothes, but the little girl who used to sit at this same table, doing homework while Marie cooked dinner. Then I looked at Julian, and the moment hardened. I set down my fork and took a sip of water. Letting the silence settle, Nancy and Julian continued eating, unaware that the script was about to change. Julian, I said, my voice calm and clear. I wanted to thank you properly for that Mustang. Julian looked up, his expression pleasant, but something flickering behind his eyes. A moment of calculation of assessment. Of course, Gary. I'm glad you're finally acknowledging it. Oh, I'm acknowledging it. I said I'm curious, though. When exactly did you arrange for the delivery truck? 15th, Julian said smoothly. Not missing a beat, the dealer confirmed it. I have the paperwork at home. To 15th, I repeated. And you said the car was delivered here to this house? Yes, I had it delivered directly to your garage. He glanced at Nancy, his tone patient, as if speaking to someone who needed gentle reminders. We've been over this, Gary. The car was delivered months ago. Nancy shifted uncomfortably. Dad, maybe we don't need to. I'm just trying to understand, I said, keeping my eyes on Julian because I've been racking my brain trying to remember, and I keep coming back to the same problem. What problem? Julian asked, his smile remaining but his voice taking on an edge. Chikasiowam, The problem that my garage doesn't have a door, I said quietly. It's been broken for 3 years, rusted off the hinges. Anyone who delivered a car here would have noticed that. Immediately, silence. Nancy's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Julian's expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. Up the side entrance, Julian said, after a moment. They must have used the side entrance. But there is no side entrance to my garage, I said. It's a single-car garage with one door, a door that hasn't closed in 3 years. Julian's smile finally slipped just a fraction. Maybe they parked it in the driveway, then for 7 months, through a Minnesota winter without me noticing, Nancy set down her fork, her eyes moving between us. Dad, what are you? I set down my fork and looked at Julian across the table. It was time Julian reached for his wineglass, and I noticed his hand tremble slightly. Julian, I said lightly, keeping my tone warm and conversati. Oh, Noel, can you remind me what colour the Mustang was? I'd like to picture it properly. He didn't hesitate. Navy blue Gary, a classic colour for a 65. Nancy looked up from her plate, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. Blue, honey, I thought you told me it was red. Julian blinked, his composure slipping for just a fraction of a second. No blue? You must have misheard me, sweetheart. I'm pretty sure you said. Red, Nancy replied slowly, her brow knitting. You said Dad would love it because he always wanted a red Mustang, like the one in that Steve McQueen movie. Bullet had a green Mustang, I said quietly, not red, and I never told anyone I wanted one. Julian's smile tightened. Memories? Funny people remember conversations differently. True, I said, nodding. So let's focus on facts. Where exactly did they deliver the car? You said it was here. Yes, right to your driveway. His voice sharpened. You must not remember Gary. It's been 7 months. 7 months isn't that long, I said calmly. I remember fixing the fence in May. I remember the sink leaking in July. I remember wearing 2 coats inside because I couldn't afford to fix my heater. Oh, Nancy's eyes widened. Dad, Julian said he was helping you with expenses. Let me ask another question, I said gently. Turning back to Julian, the delivery date, what day was it exactly? Julian shifted in his chair, gripping his glass. I'd have to check the paperwork. The paperwork you have at home? Yes, from the dealer. That's right. What dealer? I asked. Julian paused. What dealership sold you? A 1965 Mustang. Which one? It was a specialty dealer. I can't recall the name. Was it in Minnesota? I think so. Or Wisconsin? You spent $42,000 on a car, I said evenly, and you can't remember which state you bought it in. Nancy set her fork down. Julian, what's going on? A sheen of sweat had appeared on his forehead. Gary, I don't appreciate being interrogated like this. This is exactly the paranoia I warned Nancy about. What about the VIN? I interrupted. Insurance requires a VIN? What is it? I don't have it memo. Rised? But you have the insurance documents at home. With the dealer paperwork? Yes. And the registration? Gary, you can't remember any details. I said, my voice firm, no exact color, no date, no dealer, no VIN, no parking location. Because there was no car, there never was. Silence filled the room. Nancy stared at Julian, confusion giving way to doubt. Julian opened his mouth, then closed it. When he spoke, his voice was tight. I think you're having an episode, Gary. This is what I warned Nancy about. Confusion, false accusations. I'm not confused, I said. I have documentation, bank records, showing I never received the money you claimed to send. Evidence of an account opened in my name, with a forged signature controlled by you. Transfer receipts showing $42,000 that you spent on yourself. Nancy went pale. Dad, what are you saying? I'm saying your husband stole from me for 7 months, while making you believe he was helping. Julian shot to his feet chair, scraping loudly. This is insane. Nancy, we're leaving. Your father needs medical help. A knock echoed through the house. Sharp, firm, we froze. Julian's eyes flicked to the door, then back to me. For the first time, fear cracked through his composure. Nancy whispered, "Who would that be?" I said nothing. Another knock harder. Frank appeared from the kitchen doorway, where he'd been waiting calm and steady. He nodded once at me and opened the door. Cold air rushed in, snowflakes swirling into the warm light. Standing there was Martin Reynolds. He wore a dark overcoat dusted with snow, silver hair tousled by the wind. In his right hand was a leather briefcase, the same one he'd carried weeks earlier. Martin's eyes locked onto Julian. Then he looked at me and Nancy. "Taking in the scene, I'm sorry to interrupt," Martin said calmly. "But this conversation can't wait." Julian's voice cracked. "What are you doing here?" Frank stepped aside as Martin entered. Snow melted on his shoulders as he crossed the threshold. Nancy stood slowly, hands trembling. "Mr. Reynolds, why are you here, Mrs.?" Pierce Martin said gently. "There are things you need to know. Things your father has been trying to explain, and things your husband has been hiding." Julian's face drained of color. "You have no right. This is a family matter. It stopped being private when you committed multiple felonies," Martin replied quietly. "And it stopped being a family matter when you involved me." He set his briefcase on the table and opened it. "Julian Pierce." Martin continued, "I have documented evidence of fraudulent accounts, forged signatures, and misappropriated funds. I also have a recorded phone call in which you offered me $50,000 to recant that evidence." Nancy gasped. Julian staggered back a step. "That's a lie. I recorded every word," Martin said, "including your comments about conservatorship and your attempt to leverage my wife's cancer treatment." Nancy turned slowly to Julian. "You threatened people. You bribed him." Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I warned you," Martin said evenly, "but you chose intimidation over truth." The room was silent, except for the soft hum of the heater. Julian's shoulders sagged. Martin Reynolds stood there, snow melting at his feet, briefcase open on the table. And for the first time that evening, the truth had nowhere left to hide. The room fell silent, except for Martin's footsteps. Crossing my living room floor, he moved with purpose, his briefcase held firmly, as he approached the dining table where Marie's china still held the remains of our interrupted dinner. Nancy watched him with confusion and rising alarm. Julian remained standing, his face drained of color, his hand gripping the back of his chair so tightly his knuckles were white. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Brooks," Martin said, setting his briefcase beside the pot roast, "but Nancy needs to see this." Nancy looked between us, her voice trembling. "Martin, why are you here? I don't understand." Martin opened his briefcase with deliberate care and removed a thick, organized folder. He placed it directly in front of her. "These are transfer records," he said calmly. 7 months, $6,000 each time, from your husband's account into an account opened in your father's name." Nancy's hands shook as she opened the folder. I watched her face change as she read, confusion, then understanding, then horror. Julian stepped forward, his voice sharp. "This is absurd. Nancy, do you see what's happening? Your father orchestrated this to humiliate me?" The account was opened with a forged signature. Martin continued unfazed. "Your father never authorized it and never accessed the funds. Julian controlled the account entirely while claiming it was for Gary's care." Nancy's fingers traced the numbers. May, June, July, July. Her lips moved silently. $42,000, Nancy. "Sweetheart," Julian said softly, "your father's confused. He's been struggling. I've been trying to help him. And now he's created this conspiracy. I've always been generous." I stood and placed my notebook on the table, beside Martin's folder. "Nancy," I said gently, "look at this." She opened it slowly, page after page, of neat, dated handwriting. Grocery lists, expenses, bills paid, missed meals, cold nights. And beneath it all a section labeled what Julian said versus what actually happened, she read in silence, her face growing paler. Every visit he claimed, every call he said he made, the car that never existed, the money I never received. Nancy, you can't believe this, Julian began. Where did the money go? Nancy asked quietly. Julian froze. She looked up, tears filling her eyes. Julian, where did the money go? I told you. Your father's care? The car there is no car. Nancy said, her voice breaking. Dad's garage door has been broken for years, I remember now. That doesn't prove, and you told me the Mustang was red. Tonight you said blue. Her voice cracked. You can't even keep your story straight. Julian, tell me the truth. Julian's face hardened. You're choosing him? Your father, who's clearly deteriorating, over your husband. My father scored a perfect 30 on a cognitive assessment. 3 days ago, Nancy snapped. My father has been living on food stamps while you... She glanced at the folder. $18,000 to Lakeview Property Holdings. That's your office building, isn't it? The one you said you bought with a bonus? Silence, you used my father's name to steal money, to invest in real estate. She whispered. It's not stealing when it's family. It's theft, Nancy screamed. Standing so fast her chair fell backward. You stole from my father. You forged his signature. You let me believe you were helping him, while he wore 2 coats inside because he couldn't afford heat. Nancy, calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. She was sobbing now. How could you lie to me every day? How could you let me believe you were protecting him? Julian grabbed his coat, panic replacing anger. I don't have to listen to this. You've all turned against me fine. When you come to your senses, you know where to find me. Nancy? He was already gone. The front door slammed, rattling the windows. The silence afterward was crushing. Nancy stood motionless, staring at the door. Then her strength gave out, and she collapsed into her chair, covering her face as she sobbed. I knelt beside her and placed my hand on her shoulder. Nancy, I should have known, she cried. I should have visited more. I should have believed you. You couldn't have known. I said softly. He was very good at lying. But you're my father. I doubted you. I thought you were. She couldn't finish. I pulled her into my arms, holding her the way I had when she was small. She clung to me, shaking. Martin quietly gathered his documents. Frank remained near the door, steady and watchful. I'm so sorry, Dad, Nancy whispered. I should have believed you sooner. I held her close. You believe me now, sweetheart. That's enough. 2 weeks later, on a grey winter morning, I stood outside Hennepin County Courthouse, with Gregory's hand resting firmly on my shoulder. The building rose before us in limestone and granite, constructed in a time when courthouses were meant to inspire respect for the law. Snow from the night before dusted the steps as custodians were arced to clear a path. People moved past us lawyers with briefcases, families clutching paperwork, each carrying their own hopes into the cold. Ready? Gregory asked quietly. I nodded. My heart pounding ready, we climbed the steps together. Frank Wilson, walking silently at our side, inside the courthouse smelled of old wood and paper, history embedded in its walls. Our footsteps echoed along marble corridors, lined with courtroom doors, each one holding someone's search for justice. Gregory stopped outside courtroom 7C on the 3rd floor. Through the narrow window, I saw people gathering. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the door. Gary Gregory said, stopping me no matter what happens today. You've already won something important. Nancy believes you. I know, I replied, but he needs to be held accountable. He will be. We entered. The courtroom was smaller than television, had LED me to expect, wood-panelled walls, benches for observers, 2 tables facing the judge's bench. The Minnesota state seal hung behind the chair, where justice would soon sit. Nancy was already there, seated behind the plaintiff's table. When she saw me, she stood, her eyes red but resolute. She had filed for divorce 3 days after the confrontation at my house and had not spoken to Julian since. I sat beside Gregory across the aisle. Julian Pierce sat at the defendant's table. He looked diminished somehow, Despite his tailored suit, his attorney, Mr. Green, shuffled papers nervously, casting brief looks at his client that betrayed concern. Julian stared straight ahead, jaw-clenched hands folded tightly. More people entered. Martin Reynolds took a seat in the witness area. A court reporter prepared her machine. A bailiff stood near the chambers at exactly 9s. The bailiff announced, "All rise." The Honourable Judge Christine Morrison presiding. Judge Morrison entered, silver-streaked hair, sharp eyes composed authority. She took her seat, scanned the room and spoke. Be seated, the courtroom fell silent. Judge Morrison reviewed the case file, CK. Sinon, 24 CV 1847, Gary Matthew Brooks versus Julian Marcus Pierce, claims of elder financial exploitation, fraud, and unauthorized use of personal identity. Mr. Walsh, you represent the plaintiff? Yes, Your Honor. Gregory said, standing. Mr. Green, you represent the defendant. Yes, Your Honor, proceed. Mr. Walsh. Gregory rose, buttoned his jacket and stepped forward without notes. Your Honor, this is a clear case of elder financial exploitation. The defendant, Julian Pierce, defrauded his own father-in-law over 7 months. He opened a bank account using a forged signature, transferred $42,000 into that account through 7 transactions, and spent the money on personal investments and luxury expenses while claiming it was for Mr. Brooks's care. Gregory's voice was calm and precise. During this period, Mr. Brooks lived on a fixed income of $3,370 per month. He relied on food assistance and could not afford essential home repairs. He wore multiple coats indoors because his heater was broken. Meanwhile, the defendant used the stolen funds to purchase real estate, take luxury vacations, and sustain a lifestyle he could not otherwise afford. Julian's jaw twitched, though his face remained blank. The evidence will further show, Gregory continued, that Mr. Pierce attempted to conceal his crimes by convincing his wife that her father was mentally impaired. When Mr. Brooks began investigating, the defendant escalated his behaviour and attempted witness tampering and bribery. Mr. Green stood. Objection. Your Honour. We have a recording, Gregory said smoothly. A recorded phone call of Mr. Pierce, offering $50,000 to a witness in exchange for false testimony. Judge Morrison's eyes sharpened, overruled, continue. The evidence will speak clearly. Gregory said bank records, forged signatures, transaction receipts, expert testimony, and a recorded bribe. The facts and the law demand accountability. He returned to his seat. Mr. Green, Judge Morrison said, your opening statement. Green rose, clearing his throat. Your Honour, my client maintains S. innocence. The transactions were attempts to assist a resistant and confused family member. We believe this is a misunderstanding fueled by pride. We'll address that during testimony. Judge Morrison said sharply, Mr. Walsh, call your first witness. Gregory stood. The plaintiff calls Martin Reynolds. Martin rose and walked to the stand. Composed and steady, he was sworn in and seated. State your occupation. Gregory said, I'm Chief Accountant at North Star Financial Group. You reviewed the defendant's financial records. Yes. Please tell the court what you found. Martin adjusted his tie. His voice was calm, but resolute. Mr. Green stood adjusting his tie nervously. Martin had just finished his testimony. Clear, precise, devastating. He'd walked the court through the fraudulent account, the forged signature that didn't match Gary's genuine one, the 7 transfers totaling $42,000. He'd shown the itemized expenses, $18,000 for Lakeview property holdings, $4,500 for the Bahamas trip, thousands more in luxury spending. Now it was Green's turn to try to salvage his client's case. Mr. Reynolds Green began, his voice attempting confidence. You've presented financial documents showing transfers and expenditures. But how can you be certain that Mr. Brooks simply didn't forget receiving this money, that he wasn't involved in these financial arrangements and simply lost track? Martin's expression didn't change because Mr. Brooks never had access to the account in question. Only Mr. Pierce had access. The account authorization clearly lists Julian Pierce as the sole account manager, with all withdraw and transfer privileges. But the account was in Mr. Brooks's name. You in name only. The signature used to open it was forged. Green shifted tactics, turning toward Judge Morrison. Your Honour, my client believes that Mr. Brooks, at 68 years old, may be experiencing cognitive decline, living alone. Perhaps he's simply confused about financial matters. It's not uncommon for elderly individuals to objection. Gregory stood. Smoothly, counsel is testifying rather than questioning the witness. Sustained, Judge Morrison said, Mr. Green, do you have actual questions for this witness? Green flushed. No, Your Honour, but I'd like to address the issue of Mr. Brooks's mental capacity. Gregory stood again. Your Honour, Mr. Brooks anticipated precisely this attack on his competency. Judge Morrison looked at Gregory with interest. Go on, Mr. Walsh, the plaintiff, underwent a comprehensive cognitive assessment administered by a licensed clinical psychologist just days after the defendant began suggesting he was mentally impaired. With the court's permission, I'd like to call Mr. Brooks to the stand to present that evidence. Permission granted. My heart pounded as Gregory gestured for me to approach. I stood my legs steadier than I'd expected and walked to the witness stand. The bailiff swore me in, and I sat looking out at the courtroom. Nancy sat in the gallery, her hands clasped tightly. Julian stared at the table in front of him. Judge Morrison watched me with sharp, assessing eyes. Mr. Brooks, Gregory began gently, Mr. Green has suggested you might be experiencing cognitive decline. Can you address that claim? I took a breath. 3 days after, my son-in-law began telling my daughter I was confused. I underwent a full cognitive assessment at St. Mary's Medical Centre, the mini mental state examination administered by Dr. Patricia Patterson. Gregory handed me a document. Is this the report from that assessment? I looked at the familiar page. Dr. Patterson's official letterhead, her signature at the bottom. Yes, can you tell the court your score? Out of 30, perfect score. Dr. Patterson's written conclusion states, cognitive function intact, no evidence of memory impairment or cognitive decline, performance above average for age group. Gregory entered the document into evidence, handing a copy to Judge Morrison. She read it carefully. Her expression unreadable. Mr. Brooks. Gregory continued, the defendant also claimed you were confy. Used about financial matters that you couldn't keep track of money. How do you respond to that? I pulled out my notebook, the same one I'd shown Nancy at dinner, the one I'd been keeping for 40 years. I've maintained detailed financial records. My entire adult life this notebook documents every dollar I spent over the past year, every bill paid, every grocery purchase, every expense balanced to the penny. Gregory took the notebook, flipping through pages, and you maintained this consistently. Throughout the 7 months, Mr. Pierce claims he was helping you. Yes, you can see entries for every day. What I ate, what I paid for, where the money came from. There are no entries for any car delivery, no insurance payments, no visits from Mr. Pierce, except the ones I've explicitly documented, which were rare. Gregory turned to a specific page. What's this section here now? That's where I tracked what Mr. Pierce told me versus what actually happened. He claimed he was sending money. I never received it. He claimed he delivered a car. No car ever arrived. He told my daughter he was visiting regularly. You can see from my records. He wasn't. Gregory handed the notebook to Judge Morrison. Your Honour, this is the documentation of a man with a sharp, organized mind. Not someone experiencing confusion or decline. Judge Morrison examined the notebook, her eyes scanning page after page, of my neat handwriting, my careful records, my teacher's precision in tracking every detail. Mr. Brooks, she said, looking up at me, you taught mathematics for how long? 35 years, Your Honour. Roosevelt High School, and in that time you taught students about logic, evidence, and precise record keeping. Yes, Your Honor. Math is about proof, about showing your work, about making sure every step leads logically to the next. She nodded slowly, then turned her gaze to Julian. It was cold enough to freeze, Mr. Pierce, Judge Morrison said, her voice cutting through the courtroom, attempting to discredit a victim's mental capacity. Is not a defense. It's an insult. To this court and to Mr. Brooks, the evidence shows clearly that Mr. Brooks is of sound mind, has been throughout this ordeal, and has documented his experience with the kind of precision that would make any accountant proud. She looked at Green counsel. If your only defense is to suggest your client's victim is too confused to know he's been victimized, you have no defense at all. Proceed accordingly. Green sat down, his face red, his case crumbling. I returned to my seat beside Gregory. My hands were shaking slightly, but I felt something else too: vindication. Julian had tried to make me look incompetent, unreliable, too old, and confused to trust. And I'd just proven in front of a judge and my daughter and everyone present that I was none of those things. Gregory leaned close. Well done, he whispered. But he wasn't finished. He stood again facing Judge Morrison. Your Honor, there's one more piece of evidence the court needs to hear: evidence of witness tampering and intimidation. Julian's head snapped up, his face draining of color. Gregory remained standing. He looked at Judge Morrison. Your Honor, there's one more piece of evidence. The court needs to hear evidence of witness tampering and threats against a witness. The courtroom sound system crackled softly before settling into a low hum. Judge Morrison looked up from her notes. Mr. Walsh, explain. Gregory stood, his face grave. Your Honor, after Mr. Reynolds agreed to testify for Mr. Brooks, the defendant attempted to bribe and threaten him. Mr. Reynolds recorded the entire conversation. Mr. Green leapt to his feet. Objection, this is a serious allegation, Judge Morrison said coldly. I'll allow it proceed. Mr. Walsh. Gregory gestured toward Martin, who returned to the witness stand. He had testified earlier about the financial records, but now his posture was more rigid, his hands clasped tightly. Mr. Reynolds, Gregory said, please describe what happened on the evening of January 8th. Martin took a slow breath. I received a phone call at 11 o'clock at night. It was from Julian Pierce. That's late for a business call. Gregory said it wasn't a business call. Martin replied it was an attempt to buy my silence. Mr. Green stood again. Your Honor, sit down, Mr. Green, Judge Morrison snapped. Continue, Martin nodded. Mr. Pierce called me at home. He knew my wife has stage 3 breast cancer. He knew we were struggling with medical expenses. He offered me $50,000 if I would recant my testimony and tell Mr. Brooks I had made mistakes in the financial records. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Nancy covered her mouth. He also threatened me, Martin continued. He said that if I refused, he would have me fired from North Star Financial, that I would lose my health insurance, and that my wife would be unable to afford her treatment. And you recorded this call? Gregory asked. Yes, I have a recording app on my phone. When Mr. Pierce began making his offer, I activated it. Gregory held up a small device connected to the sound system. Your Honor, with permission, we'd like to play the recording. Judge Morrison looked at Julian, then at his attorney, then back to Gregory. Permission granted. Gregory pressed play. Julian's voice filled the courtroom. Clear, unmistakable. Martin, let me be clear with you. I watched Julian as his words echoed back at him. His face had drained of color, his hands flat against the table. Frozen. You have two choices. Accept $50,000 in cash and forget a few details about that subsidiary account. Martin's recorded voice sounded hesitant. That's a lot of money, but my career, your career, Julian scoffed. You're replaceable. There are dozens of accountants just like you. Nancy began to cry, her shoulders shaking. If I tell North Star you shared confidential client information, which technically you did, they'll fire you immediately. Julian's tone grew darker. You can't afford to lose your job, and you definitely can't afford to lose your insurance. Catherine needs that coverage, doesn't she? Stage 3. Breast cancer isn't cheap. Someone gasped in the gallery. Judge Morris. On's face hardened. Tomorrow night 8. Nicolette Mall. Parking lot, south entrance. I'll bring the cash. You bring a statement saying you reviewed the records again and realized you made errors. Martin's recorded voice trembled. Tomorrow night? 8 sharp, and this offer expires tomorrow. If you don't show up, I'll assume you've chosen. I'll call compliance. Friday morning, you'll be fired by noon. Your insurance gone within 30 days, and Catherine will have to figure out treatment without coverage. The recording ended. The silence was crushing. Julian sat motionless, sweat visible on his forehead. There was no denial possible. His own voice had convicted him. Mr. Green stared at the table defeated. Nancy sobbed openly now, her face buried in her hands. I wanted to reach her, but stayed seated. Judge Morrison slowly removed her glasses and set them on the bench. She looked directly at Julian. Mr. Pierce, she said evenly, witness tampering is a felony. Bribery is a felony. You committed all 3. And we have a recording. Julian said nothing. Your Honor, Mr. Green tried, be quiet. Mr. Green, Judge Morrison said sharply. Your client threatened a witness's livelihood and his wife's health care to conceal elder financial exploitation. There is no defense for that. She turned back to Julian. I have presided over hundreds of cases, theft, fraud, embezzlement. But what you did, stealing from your own father-in-law, forging his signature, spending his money while he wore coats indoors because he couldn't afford heat, then gaslighting him into doubting his sanity, and finally threatening a witness. That is among the most calculated acts of cruelty I have seen in 20 years. Julian stared down, unable to meet her gaze. And you did all of this while convincing your wife you were helping her father, she continued. That makes it worse. She looked to Gregory, Mr. Walsh. I am prepared to rule, but first Judge Morrison turned back to Julian, fixing him with a piercing stare. Mr. Pierce, do you have anything to say in your own defense? The courtroom held its breath. Mr. Pierce, she repeated. Do you have anything to say? He judge's gavel struck 3 times, sharp, final absolute. Mr. Pierce, stand. Julian rose slowly, his legs trembling. His expensive suit looked rumpled, his practiced confidence completely gone. Mr. Green stood beside him defeated. Judge Morrison regarded Julian with cold finality. Mr. Pierce, you have been found guilty of elder financial exploitation under Minnesota Statute 6. 0-9052. The evidence also establishes grounds for criminal charges of witness tampering, bribery and extortion. This court orders full restitution of $42,000 to Gary Brooks, along with court costs and legal fees. You are permanently barred from managing any financial accounts for Mr. Brooks or any member of his family. This case is referred to the district attorney for prosecution on the witness tampering charges. Julian's face drained of colour. Additionally, Judge Morrison continued, a restraining order is issued. You are not to contact Gary Brooks directly or indirectly. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honour, Julian whispered. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck again. Julian collapsed into his chair, head in his hands. Nancy looked at him one last time, not with anger, but with grief for everything she'd believed. Then she turned away 3 days later. The money appeared in my bank account, all $42,000 transferred by court order. I stared at the screen. Stunned, the first call I made was to the furnace repair company. Within 2 days, warm air filled the house. I bought new coats, not because I needed layers anymore, but because I finally could. I filled my refrigerator with real food. Most of the money, $35,000, I used to establish the Brooks Justice Fund, a non-profit dedicated to helping elderly victims of financial abuse. Martin helped me navigate the paperwork with care and precision. A week later, a handwritten card arrived from Martin. Dear Mr. Brooks, thank you for standing up. Catherine's treatment is going well. Your courage saved more than yourself. It saved my F. Amelie too, with gratitude, Martin and Catherine Reynolds. I taped the card to my refrigerator, beside Marie's photo. Julian disappeared. His remaining assets were seized. But before the criminal trial began, he withdrew what he could and fled Minnesota. Nancy filed for divorce the day after the ruling. She wanted nothing from him but freedom. 2 months later, on a rainy April evening, there was a knock at my door. Nancy stood on the porch, soaked, mascara streaked with tears. "Dad," she said, breaking, "I'm so sorry he made me doubt you." I pulled her inside. "You found your way back to the truth. That's what matters." She collapsed into my arms, sobbing deeply. "I was blind," she whispered. "Because you loved him," I said. Gently, "Love makes us hope." We stood together while rain drummed on the roof and the heater hummed. 6 months later, I stood on a stage at the Minneapolis Community Center. The room was full neighbors, former students, veterans, people I'd never met. The mayor presented me with an award, Advocate of the Year, Mr. Brooks, she said, embodies the courage it takes to stand for justice. When even family doubts you, I stepped to the microphone. Nancy sat in the front row, eyes bright. Martin and Catherine were beside her. Frank Wilson smiled from the back. The most important lesson I ever taught wasn't in a classroom. I said it was at my dining table and in a courtroom. Truth doesn't shout, it waits steady and patient until lies collapse under their own weight. I looked at Nancy. Family is worth fighting for even when it hurts, because on the other side of pain is trust rebuilt. The applause was warm, but the moment that mattered came later, when Nancy hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up. I never could." I said, that evening we sat on my porch, watching the sun paint the Minneapolis sky in golden rose. "Dad," Nancy said softly, "thank you. I couldn't do otherwise," I replied. She leaned against my shoulder. "I love you. I love you too." As the sky darkened, I realized justice isn't just about winning. It's about restoring what was broken. For the first time in years, I felt truly warm, not from heat, but from truth, family, and a future no longer shaped by lies. Tomorrow, the Brooks Justice Fund would help its first client. Tomorrow, Nancy would rebuild. Tomorrow, I'd wake in a warm house with my daughter, believing in me again. But tonight, we just sat together, watching one chapter end and another begin. Looking back at my family story, I realized how close I came to losing everything, not just my money, but my daughter's trust and my own dignity. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any other wound, because it comes from those we love most. Those we'd never imagined could hurt us. If you're facing something similar, don't be like I was in those first months, silent, proud, and alone. Don't wait until you're wearing 2 coats indoors before you ask for help. Family betrayal doesn't heal through silence. It heals through truth, spoken with courage and love. Here's what I learned. First, document everything. My teacher's notebook saved me because truth needs evidence. Second, trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Third, don't let anyone, not even family, make you doubt your own mind. And finally, fight for what's right, even when it costs you everything. God gave me strength when I had none left. When I sat alone in that cold house, wondering if anyone would believe me, I prayed for clarity and courage. God answered by sending Martin, Gregory, and Frank angels in human form, who stood beside me when I needed them most. And God restored what was stolen, not just financially, but spiritually, giving me back my daughter and teaching us both that truth, no matter how painful, is always worth pursuing. This family story isn't just mine. It's a warning and a hope for anyone facing family betrayal. The elderly are vulnerable, but we're not helpless with God's guidance, courage, and good people willing to stand with us. Thank you for watching this video. Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly value every story and every voice. Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Uncle Bernard and share this video with your friends.